So again, thank you so much for this. It's my pleasure here. So my name is Carla Bonina, and I'm part of the Startup Business School at the Center of Digital Economy. And as I said, it's a real pleasure to be here with my co-authors, Koskinen, Eaton and A Gawer, to present very briefly this paper. We're very grateful for the opportunity and all the help from the editors and, of course, the team of reviewers. And also, we're very grateful for the support received from the ESRC sponsor network, DIOD, that you mentioned, Brian, and the very valuable feedback we received along different phases of this project for the last couple of years. And I can see also good friends and colleagues attending this webinar. So what I would like to do today is, again, very briefly to present the key points of our paper. It's an open access paper that is already having a very good reception, and we're very grateful and happy with that. And again, there's a lot more detail, but here you'll have an overview. I think, Brian, you touch upon something that was for us very, very important as an empirical motivation of this paper, the role of the big platforms, and as you say, the frightful five, or the so-called GAFAM these days, or although I think the F has changed. These global digital platforms are now valued in $10 trillion, right? And just to give you a perspective, that's 10 times the GDP of Mexico, which is a very big country. This doesn't mean, of course, that the significance of platforms for development has not been out there. What we found that was precisely a gap from the literature taking this more developmental view. And of course, these platforms do bring a lot of potential to generate social, economic, environmental value. Yet this was understudied. And we think that part of the problem was this lack of scoping on what digital platforms really are. And what this object is about, at least very much in our field in information systems and also in development studies. So this was our guiding question, right, for this conceptual piece. What do digital platforms mean for development? We take a broad view on development that is a holistic view that goes beyond, of course, economic growth, and encompass these other developmental outcomes, very much exemplified by the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So with that in mind, this paper does three main things, right? The first one is precisely to scope this object, right? And to do this, we build from the work of my co-authors in this project, A Gawer from the strategic management perspective mainly, and also Eaton from the information systems, to provide this characterization of platforms. We have very much these two types, the transaction and the innovation, that we think bring a bit more clarity to our understanding of digital platforms. And what we do there, and there is a lot more detail in the paper, is to explain the purpose, explain the focus that each of them take in the literature, explain the underlying digital characteristics, and that's, as you know, very important for our field. Also review the basis for value creation and capture, and we provide examples that will link to developmental outcomes. We do not stop there. We also take on board the literature on ICT4D and this contextual socio-technical idea to also bring some of the nuances that you have in different stakeholders and platform governance for the purpose of development or the developmental lens. So the second thing we do in the paper is precisely to use this scoping to review the literature. As Brian mentioned, there were already lots of studies out there that perhaps would not talk about digital platforms in this characterization. So we tried to map that. We did a very comprehensive review on the major ICT for the outlets and also the IS basket of 8. And this is more or less a summary of what we found there. Of course, a lot more detail on the paper, but very much the literature was talking about transaction, very much this matchmaking platforms, right? That we're, I think, mostly familiar with, rather than the innovation platforms, those that enable other third-party developers to do new things, and they act in different ways. A lot of the emphasis of these papers were on removing frictions, very much of big importance for the global south or the development context. This is access to information, creation of new markets, for example, in agriculture or rural settings. There was also a trend on more emergent or nascent ideas of, just simple platforms. Simple in the sense of less sophisticated use of SMEs and ideas like that. And then a bigger presence of what we call non-commercial actors. Of course, this might not be surprising because in the context of development, NGOs, governments, and also big donors have a bigger role there. We also find that the significance of context was very important, whether it's in the institutional rules or regulations, the infrastructure, issues of access was very much on the papers. And again, for an ICT for the audience, this is not surprising. Again, a lot more detail on the paper, but this is a bit of a summary of what we found. And with this, we do a third thing. So using the scoping of digital platforms and then what we found in the literature, we envisaged this agenda in the form of 6 research questions. I'm going to name them here very briefly on indigenous innovation, or whether these digital platforms create or destroy institutions, whether the inequalities are actually exacerbated by digital platforms. The fourth of platform alternatives in the sense of are alternative forms of value being generated or created with this more developmental lens. The dark side, things already Brian touched upon, concentration of power, surveillance, and the very harmful effects that some of them might be doing at the moment. And then a last one on the categorization of that we found, transaction and innovation and the context of development. So for each of these themes, we define the research question, we explain what this is about, and we provide examples or potential directions, whether theoretically or methodologically, or even some of the studies that are already tackling some of this for future work. Of course, these 6 research questions are not mutually exclusive, and you may see a lot of overlaps. For example, within the dark side and concentration of power, we also may find implications on the exacerbation of inequalities or the destruction or creation of institutions. So I would like just to finish with a big umbrella or overview of what we think our paper does. First, we think that this scoping of digital platforms, this characterization in transaction and in innovation with all their characteristics, while that might not be new because it's been already developed in other fields, it's very important for information systems to contribute to this lack of clarity we spoke at the beginning. And this is not just for development. We think this is important for the field itself. We also think that this 6 research questions together with the scoping will actually help us mobilize a better understanding of these developmental outcomes and what digital platforms mean for development and not just in developing countries. With that, I'd like to close. There is also this idea of call. We were actually, we debated with the team about whether this categorization, for example, that is very well known and developed for the global north, whether it's applicable, whether we need more nuances in terms of development, and that's something that our paper calls upon. And with the 30 seconds left, and I would like then my co-authors to add something in the Q&A when we have a bit more space, to say I'm also leading a new book project. It's an edited volume with already great contributors. So if any of you in the audience would like to you know, perhaps get in touch, if you're working on any of these 6 areas, do get in touch with me in case it can be considered. And with that, I would like to close this and pass it on to the next author. And again, a pleasure being here.